Cowboy rode beside Apache at Twilight, and one unopened bag rewrote their bond. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Ethan Rivers had always been a man of the land, quiet, reserved, and lost in the simple rhythms of ranch life. His boots made soft crunching sounds as they pressed against the dry earth beneath him, the faint scent of sagebrush lingering in the cool air of the approaching twilight. The sun had dipped low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the vast, open plains that stretched endlessly in front of him. This was his world, uncomplicated, undisturbed, save for the occasional rider passing through his property. On that particular evening, as Ethan rode slowly through the arid terrain, the sky turning hues of orange and purple, he spotted something unexpected. There, in the distance, a lone figure on horseback, an Apache woman. Her posture was graceful, her silhouette framed by the fading light of day. Ethan had seen many things in his life as a cowboy, but a woman from the Apache tribe riding alone on this stretch of land was an unusual sight. He had heard the rumors, stories passed around campfires and in the saloons, but this moment felt different. She wasn't like the others, aggressive, loud, or confrontational. She rode with a calm presence, almost as if the desert itself had woven her into its vast tapestry. The wind shifted, bringing with it the familiar earthy scent of the desert. As Ethan approached, he studied her, noting the ease with which she guided her horse, the fluidity of her movements. It was almost as if they were part of the same world, bound by the same sun and wind. The distance between them closed, and Ethan raised his hand in a gesture of respect, something that was instinctive for him in moments like this. She responded with a small nod, her eyes locking onto his as if they had shared 1,000 unspoken words. As they rode side by side, the world around them seemed to grow quiet, the rhythmic clop of hooves on the dusty trail the only sound filling the space between them. For a brief moment, Ethan forgot the usual tensions that defined life between settlers and the Apache. The sky, painted in shades of twilight, seemed to tell a story of its own, a story of two worlds, once divided, now coming together in the fading light. And then, as if the universe itself had decided to intervene, the woman reached into a small leather pouch hanging at her side, a motion so fluid it could have been a ritual. Ethan's curiosity piqued, but he said nothing, allowing the silence to stretch between them like a bridge of understanding. Without saying a word, she handed him the unopened bag. Her eyes, calm and steady, held his for a moment longer than usual. What was inside? What significance did this gesture hold? Ethan didn't know, but he could feel the weight of the moment. The bag, though small, felt heavy in his hands, as though it contained not just a physical object, but a key to something far deeper, something that could change the course of his life. He didn't ask, but in that instant, he understood that his life, and the bond forming between him and the Apache woman, would never be the same. Ethan held the bag in his hands, the leather soft but sturdy, like the earth beneath their horses' hooves. He could feel the weight of it, but it was not the kind of weight that came from gold or silver. It was something deeper, something that connected the very fabric of the world around them. The woman beside him, Aya, watched him closely, her eyes steady and calm, yet filled with an unreadable expression. She didn't speak, but her silence was a language of its own, one that asked him to understand without words. Ethan's fingers traced the edge of the pouch, hesitating for a moment before he slowly opened it. Inside, there was nothing extravagant, no treasure or trinket, just a simple piece of cloth. But when he touched it, something stirred in him, like an old memory awakening from the dust of forgotten time. The cloth was embroidered with intricate patterns, symbols that seemed familiar yet foreign, symbols of a culture he had never fully understood. Aya shifted slightly, her gaze never leaving him, and in that moment, Ethan realized the significance of the bag. It was a gift, but not in the way he had expected. It was a symbol of trust, of something much larger than just a mere exchange between two people. It was a bond forged in the quiet understanding of the land and its people. He looked at her, the weight of the moment pressing down on him, and for the first time, he felt something stir within him that was not just curiosity, but a deep, unspoken connection. Aya, despite her quiet demeanor, had opened a door to something within him that he hadn't known was there. "Why do you carry this?" Ethan asked, his voice steady but with an undertone of curiosity that matched his gaze. Aya's lips parted as if to speak, but she paused, as though the words were carefully chosen, carefully guarded. She did not answer immediately, instead turning her eyes to the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the land. The twilight was their moment, a fleeting space between day and night, where all things seemed possible. Aya's voice, when it came, was soft but clear, carrying the weight of 1,000 untold stories. "It is not just a gift," she said. "It is a promise. A promise to keep what was lost, to remember what has been forgotten." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. He had heard tales of the Apache people, stories that spoke of ancient promises and the land's deep, silent power, but this was different. This wasn't just a tale, it was a living bond, a thread connecting them across the vast divide of cultures, of histories. He stared at the cloth, tracing the patterns with his fingers, feeling a deep sense of responsibility wash over him. What was he to do with this gift, with this promise? The air between them seemed to thicken with meaning, and for a long moment neither spoke. The sound of their horses' hooves on the dusty trail was the only thing that broke the silence. Ethan realized then that his life had changed in a way he couldn't yet understand. Aya had brought him something far more valuable than anything he could have imagined. It was not wealth, not land, but something deeper, a call to remember, to honor, and perhaps to heal. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold, Ethan knew that this moment was only the beginning. The road ahead would not be easy, and the promise Aya carried was a heavy one. But as they rode together, side by side, Ethan felt a strange sense of peace settle over him, as if the weight of the land itself had shifted in his favor. Ethan and Aya continued to ride through the evening, the cool breeze of twilight brushing against their faces as the sky darkened to a deep blue. The path ahead was quiet, but Ethan could feel the weight of the moment settling in his chest. The bag she had given him, the one with the cloth inside, had not only rewritten his bond with her but seemed to whisper of something larger, something he couldn't yet grasp. He glanced over at her, her silhouette framed against the fading light. Her presence felt calm, yet there was a depth to her that made him wonder what secrets she carried. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. They were both bound by something unspoken, and in that moment, Ethan realized that he had not just encountered a woman from the Apache tribe, he had encountered a symbol of everything he had tried to forget, and everything he had been running from. "Do you often travel alone?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence, his voice steady but tinged with curiosity. Aya didn't immediately respond, and for a moment, he thought she might not answer. Then, with a soft breath, she spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "I have no one," she said, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. "My people are scattered. Many have fallen, and those who remain are far from here." Her words hung in the air between them, and Ethan could feel the weight of her loss, though he didn't fully understand it. His life had been one of solitude, but it was a solitude born of choice. Aya's solitude was something different. It was the kind that came from the destruction of a people, from the breaking of a way of life. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice softer now. "I can't imagine what that's like." Aya turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. "No, you can't," she said with a small, knowing smile. "But you understand the weight of loss." Ethan felt his chest tighten. The truth of her words struck him harder than he expected. He had lost more than just his family. He had lost his place in the world. The land he rode on was once his, a place where he could disappear into the quiet rhythm of the earth. Now, it felt empty. He looked at Aya, her face expressionless but her eyes filled with something he couldn't name. What will you do? He asked. When you find what you're looking for, what comes next? Aya's gaze turned forward once again, the last light of the day catching the edge of her features. I will return to my people, she said, her voice steady. And I will rebuild what has been lost. Ethan felt a pang of something in his chest, a mixture of admiration and a strange sense of fear. He didn't know what it was, but he knew that whatever came next for her, it would change everything. They rode on in silence, the night slowly settling around them, and for the first time, Ethan felt the weight of his own choices pressing on him. He had chosen a life of isolation, but now he wasn't sure if it had been the right choice. As the stars began to appear overhead, Ethan realized that the road ahead was not just one of survival. It was one of understanding, of crossing boundaries he hadn't thought possible. And Aya, despite her quiet strength, was showing him that there was more to life than the solitude he had clung to for so long. Ethan and Aya continued their journey through the vast, open land, the night growing deeper with each passing hour. The air was cooler now, the last warmth of the day fading into the stillness of the evening. The horses moved steadily, their hooves silent against the dry earth, and the only sound was the occasional rustle of the wind through the sagebrush. Ethan found himself glancing at Aya more often now, unable to shake the sense of connection that had formed between them, despite the vast differences in their worlds. He had always prided himself on his ability to stay detached, to keep his emotions in check. But Aya's quiet strength, her resolve, was starting to chip away at the walls he had so carefully built around himself. As they rode, Ethan couldn't help but wonder about the life she had led. What had it been like, growing up in the Apache culture, a culture so different from his own? How had she become the woman who could ride through this land with such calm, such purpose? Aya, Ethan said softly, breaking the silence. Do you ever regret it? Leaving your people, I mean? Aya's gaze did not shift from the path ahead, but her voice, when it came, was steady and calm. I didn't leave them, she said quietly. I had to go. I had to find something that was lost. But I carry them with me, in everything I do. They are never far. Ethan nodded, though he didn't fully understand. He had always believed that leaving behind his past had been the right choice, but now, with each word Aya spoke, he began to question that belief. Was there something more to this life, more to the land, than just survival? The question lingered in his mind, but he didn't voice it. The sound of a distant howl broke through the stillness, a reminder that they were not alone out here in the wilderness. Aya's eyes flickered toward the horizon, her posture stiffening slightly. Ethan watched her closely, sensing a change in the air. She had always carried herself with quiet confidence, but now, there was a tension in her, something that told him danger was not far off. What is it? Ethan asked, his voice low. Aya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she urged her horse into a faster pace, her eyes scanning the land ahead. Ethan followed suit, his instincts telling him to trust her, to follow her lead. They rode in silence for a while longer, the landscape shifting as the mountains loomed larger in the distance. The sense of unease that had settled over Ethan was growing stronger, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something beyond their control. The sun had long since set, and the darkness pressed in around them like a heavy blanket. Then, from the shadows of the trees ahead, figures began to emerge, silent, moving with the ease of predators in their own land. Ethan's heart quickened, and his hand instinctively moved to the rifle slung across his back. Aya, however, seemed unfazed. She slowed her horse, her eyes narrowing, as she took in the approaching figures. Stay close, she murmured, her voice low and steady. Ethan did as she instructed, his gaze fixed on the figures ahead. As they drew closer, he could see that they were not alone. There were others, hidden in the darkness, watching from the shadows. Ethan's mind raced. Were they hostile? Were they here for Aya, or were they simply passing through? Aya's presence was commanding, even in the face of danger, and for a moment, Ethan felt a strange sense of calm. The figures stopped a few paces away, and the silence stretched between them, thick with tension. One of the figures stepped forward, his face partially obscured by a hood, but his eyes, cold and piercing, locked onto Ethan's. Aya's expression remained unchanged, but Ethan could feel the shift in the air, the tension that seemed to hum just beneath the surface. "Who are you?" the figure asked, his voice gruff and low. Ethan felt the weight of the question, but Aya answered before he could speak. "I am Aya," she said, her voice firm. "And this is my companion." The figure studied them both for a moment, his gaze lingering on Ethan before moving back to Aya. "You carry something important," he said. Ethan's brow furrowed. What was the man talking about? But before he could ask, Aya spoke again, her tone even. "I carry nothing that concerns you," she said, her voice cold now, a warning. The figure seemed to hesitate, as if weighing his next move. Finally, he stepped back, signaling for the others to remain where they were. "We do not mean you harm," he said, his voice softening. "But you are not alone in this land." The words hung in the air, and Ethan felt the weight of them settle over him. This was no longer just a journey. It was something larger, something that would change everything he thought he knew about the land and the people who inhabited it. Aya had been right. This was not just about survival. It was about something far deeper, something he was only beginning to understand. Ethan and Aya stood motionless for a moment, the silence around them thick with unspoken tension. The figures before them had not moved, their eyes studying them intently, as if trying to decipher a puzzle. Ethan could feel the weight of their gaze, the sharpness of their scrutiny. He glanced at Aya, who remained calm, her posture unwavering. Her eyes, though, held a quiet strength, and it was clear she was prepared for whatever came next. The figure who had spoken earlier took a step back, giving a subtle nod to the others. The tension in the air seemed to ease, just slightly, but Ethan's instincts told him that this was far from over. The figure spoke again, his voice lower now, almost respectful. "You walk a dangerous path," he said, his tone filled with something that resembled understanding. "But you are not alone." Ethan's brow furrowed. What did he mean by that? Aya, without breaking her gaze from the man, replied, her voice steady. "I am never alone." The words hung in the air, and Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't sure what it was about Aya that made him feel both at ease and on edge at the same time, but he had no doubt that her presence was as powerful as it was unsettling. The figure nodded once more, then stepped aside, signaling for his companions to do the same. "You will find what you seek," he said, his voice no longer a threat but a simple statement. "But be careful. The world does not bend to the will of the one who rides alone." With that, the group began to retreat into the shadows, their figures melting into the night as quickly as they had appeared. Ethan stood there, unsure of what had just happened. He glanced at Aya, who had not moved a muscle, her face unreadable. "What was that about?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Aya didn't immediately respond. She simply looked up at the stars, the vastness of the sky above them reminding Ethan of the endless, unspoken truths that existed between them. "It was a warning," she finally said, her voice quiet but firm. "The world has its own way of keeping balance. It watches, even when we don't see it." Ethan's mind raced. The sense of mystery surrounding Aya deepened, and he realized that he had only scratched the surface of the world she had come from. The Apache people, the land they roamed, the deep connection they shared with it, he had always heard stories, but now, standing beside her, he felt as though he was living within one. "You said you were looking for something," Ethan said, shifting his weight. "What exactly is it?" Aya turned her gaze to him, her eyes filled with a depth that seemed to speak volumes. "It's not just about finding something," she replied, her voice soft. "It's about remembering what was lost." Ethan wasn't sure what she meant, but the weight of her words lingered in the air between them. There was more to this journey than he had anticipated. This wasn't just about survival. It was about something far bigger, something tied to the land, to the people who had once called it home. And as they continued their ride into the night, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that his path was now intertwined with Aya's, in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear, the journey they were on would change everything. With each mile, with each word, the bond between them deepened. And as the stars above them continued to shine, Ethan felt the pull of something greater than himself, something that had always been there, waiting to be discovered. Ethan rode beside Aya as the land stretched out before them, the stars now brighter than ever in the clear, night sky. The silence that surrounded them was peaceful, but there was an underlying tension, a quiet understanding that the journey they were on was far from ordinary. Ethan could feel it in the way Aya rode, her presence solid and unshaken, as though she was part of the land itself. He had always thought of himself as someone who lived for the moment, who sought the simplicity of life on the open plains. But now, with each step they took, he felt as though he were stepping into a deeper story, one that held meaning far beyond what he had imagined. Aya had told him that she carried the weight of her people with her, and though she had not spoken of her past in detail, Ethan could sense that her quest was one of both personal and cultural significance. "Do you ever feel like the land speaks to you?" Ethan asked, his voice breaking the stillness between them. Aya looked ahead, her expression thoughtful, her eyes reflecting the vastness of the night sky. "The land speaks to those who listen," she said quietly. "It tells us where we are needed, what we must protect, and what has been lost." Ethan nodded, absorbing her words. He had never thought of the land in such a way, but now, it felt as though every part of it, the wind, the earth, the distant mountains, was part of something much larger, something that connected everything and everyone. "And what has been lost?" Ethan asked, his curiosity growing. Aya's gaze softened, and for a moment, there was a sadness in her eyes that spoke of a deep, personal loss. "The way we lived," she said simply. "Our traditions, our freedom, the connection to the earth that once defined us. We've been forced to adapt, to change, but there are things we can never forget." Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. He had always seen the world through the lens of his own experience, but now, as Aya spoke, he realized just how much he had taken for granted. The Apache people had lived in harmony with this land for generations, and yet, that connection had been broken. "Is that what you're looking for? To restore what's been lost?" Ethan asked. Aya's lips parted slightly, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned her eyes to the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "What we seek is not just for ourselves," she said, her voice soft. "It's for those who have come before us, and for those who will come after." Ethan looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always believed in the importance of survival, of getting through each day. But now, with Aya beside him, he understood that there was something far more important than just surviving. There was a deeper purpose, a connection to the land, to each other, and to a history that could not be forgotten. The sun slowly rose, casting its warm light over the landscape, and as they rode together, Ethan felt a shift within himself. He was no longer just a cowboy riding across the plains. He was part of something larger, something timeless. Aya's journey was not just hers, it was one that called to him as well. As they continued their ride, the road ahead seemed clearer, though still uncertain. But for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The bond between them had deepened, and with it, a new understanding had begun to take root. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about remembering, about protecting, and about honoring what had been lost. Ethan and Aya continued their ride through the changing landscape, the sun rising higher in the sky, casting a warm, golden light over the plains. The air was still cool, but the promise of the day's heat was already beginning to seep into the ground. Ethan felt a strange sense of purpose now, one he had not known before. It wasn't just the land he was riding across, it was something deeper, something that connected him to the earth, to Aya, and to a story that was still unfolding. They had ridden for hours in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, yet in the quiet of the morning, Ethan couldn't help but feel a growing curiosity. The questions he had kept at bay were now at the forefront of his mind. "Aya," he began, his voice cutting through the stillness. "You said you were looking for something. Something lost. What is it you're trying to find?" Aya didn't answer right away. Her gaze was fixed ahead, her expression unreadable, but Ethan could sense she was weighing her words carefully. After a moment she spoke, her voice steady. "I am looking for the heart of my people," she said quietly. "The place where we once belonged, where we lived in harmony with the land. But that place is lost now. The land has been forgotten, and so have we." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had not expected such a deep, personal answer. He had known that Aya's journey was about more than just survival, but this was something more profound. "But how will you find it?" Ethan asked, his curiosity piqued. Aya glanced at him, her eyes meeting his for the first time in hours. There was something in her gaze, something ancient and filled with resolve. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I must keep searching. It's not just about finding a place, it's about finding a way back to who we were, to what we lost. And if I do not find it, then I will make it. I will create it for those who come after." Ethan nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling in. He had never thought much about the past, his own history had been one of moving forward, never looking back. But Aya's words made him wonder, was there more to the world than just moving forward? Was there something worth preserving, something worth returning to? As they continued their journey, the terrain began to change. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills, the mountains in the distance becoming clearer. Ethan could feel the shift in the air, a subtle change that signaled they were approaching something important, something that lay just beyond the horizon. Aya's pace quickened, her eyes now scanning the land with renewed focus. Ethan followed her lead, his heart racing with anticipation, though he wasn't sure why. There was something about this place, about this journey, that was drawing him in, pulling him towards something he didn't fully understand. They rode for hours more, the landscape growing wilder, the air thinner, and the sense of something unknown, something powerful, growing stronger. Finally, as the sun began to dip low in the sky again, Aya pulled her horse to a stop. Ethan did the same, his eyes following her as she dismounted and stood silently, her gaze fixed on the horizon. He stood beside her, the silence between them now thick with meaning. There, on the distant horizon, was a place that seemed to call to her, a place that Ethan couldn't yet see, but felt in the air around them. "This is it," Aya said softly, her voice filled with reverence. "This is where we begin again." Ethan looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what this place was, but in that moment, he knew that whatever came next, he would be part of it. The journey they had started was no longer just hers, it was his too. The bond between them had grown deeper, stronger, and now, as the stars began to appear in the evening sky, Ethan felt something stirring inside him. A sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, that he had never felt before. This journey was about more than just finding the past. It was about creating the future, and together, Ethan and Aya were going to shape it. Ethan stood beside Aya as they gazed at the land before them, the sun now setting behind the distant mountains, casting a soft, golden hue across the valley. There was a sense of finality in the air, yet it felt like the beginning of something new. The place Aya had led him to was quiet, untouched by time, as if it held the secrets of the past in its very soil. Ethan could feel the weight of her words settling in his heart, the promise of a new beginning. He had followed her into this journey, unsure of where it would lead, but now, standing here, he knew it was more than just a physical path. It was a spiritual one, a path that would require him to let go of the life he had known and embrace something much larger than himself. Aya's eyes were fixed on the horizon, her expression distant but filled with purpose. "This is where it begins," she said softly, almost to herself. "This is the land where our people thrived, where we were one with the earth. We can rebuild what was lost, not just for us, but for those who come after us." Ethan turned his gaze toward the same horizon, the sense of something ancient and powerful in the air. He had lived his life on the fringes, isolated from the world around him, but now, for the first time, he felt like he was part of something that stretched beyond the present moment. The weight of history, the legacy of the Apache people, it all seemed to press upon him. "How do we begin?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with curiosity and a hint of uncertainty. Aya looked at him then, her gaze steady, and for the first time, Ethan saw a glimmer of something else in her eyes, a warmth, a trust that hadn't been there before. "We begin by remembering," she said. "By honoring what came before us, and by building a future that respects the land, our ancestors, and each other." Ethan nodded, feeling the enormity of her words. He had never thought of life in such terms, of legacy, of stewardship. But now, standing in this place, it made sense. This land was not just a place to survive. It was a place to grow, to heal, and to connect with something deeper. Aya reached down and picked up a small stone from the ground, turning it over in her hand. "This land holds the memories of our people," she said. "It remembers everything, the triumphs, the losses, the struggles. And it is waiting for us to remember too." Ethan looked at the stone in her hand, then back at the land that stretched out before them. The quiet beauty of it struck him, a vast, open expanse, untouched by time, yet marked by the stories of those who had walked here before. It was both humbling and inspiring. "What do we do next?" Ethan asked, his voice low but filled with resolve. Aya stood tall, her expression focused and determined. "We make this land ours again," she said. "We reconnect with it, just as our ancestors did. We honor it, protect it, and let it teach us what we need to know." Ethan felt a surge of emotion rise within him, a mix of hope and purpose. For so long, he had wandered through life, feeling disconnected from everything around him. But now, standing here with Aya, he felt a sense of belonging that he had never known before. "I'll help you," he said, his voice firm. Aya gave him a small smile, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I know you will," she said. The stars were beginning to appear in the sky above them, their light twinkling like distant memories. As they stood together, Ethan realized that this was the moment that had changed everything. He wasn't just a cowboy on the open plains anymore. He was part of something much larger, something that would shape his life in ways he couldn't yet understand. The journey ahead was unknown, but for the first time, he was ready to face it, alongside Aya, on this land that had been waiting for them. Ethan and Aya spent the next few days exploring the land together, the bond between them growing stronger with every passing hour. They spoke little, yet in the quiet moments, the understanding between them deepened. Aya had shown him the ancient paths, the sacred places where her people had once gathered, and the hidden springs where life had flourished. Each stop, each quiet conversation, revealed more of the history that lay buried beneath the surface of the earth, waiting to be remembered. As they continued, Ethan found himself reflecting more on his own life. The ranch he had once called home felt like a distant memory, a place that had belonged to someone else. He realized that he no longer saw himself as the cowboy who rode alone in the vast, empty land. He was now a part of something much larger, a part of the story that Aya had invited him to join. One evening, as the sky turned shades of deep purple and orange, they came upon a small grove of trees. The air was thick with the scent of pine and fresh earth, and the sound of rustling leaves was the only noise that filled the space between them. Aya stopped her horse and dismounted, her eyes scanning the surroundings with a sense of reverence. Ethan followed her lead, his boots crunching softly on the earth, as he joined her by the trees. "This is it," Aya said softly, her voice carrying a weight of emotion. "This is where we lived. This is where we belong." Ethan looked around, the sight of the trees standing tall and proud before him, their branches stretching toward the heavens, filling him with a sense of peace. It was hard to believe that such a place could have been lost, that a people could have been displaced from such a sacred ground. "What happened?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with a mix of curiosity and sorrow. Aya turned to face him, her expression solemn but resolute. "We were pushed off this land," she said, her voice steady. "Our way of life was taken from us piece by piece. But this place, it never left us. It is here, in the earth, in the trees, in the air. And now we will return." Ethan felt a deep stirring within him. It was as if the land itself had called to him, urging him to stand alongside Aya in her quest to restore what had been lost. He could feel the weight of the responsibility settle over him, the understanding that this journey was no longer just about Aya or her people. It was about the land itself, about the legacy of those who had lived here before, and about the future that they were all now building together. "How do we begin?" Ethan asked, his voice low but filled with resolve. Aya smiled, her eyes glimmering with the light of determination. "We begin by honoring what came before us," she said, her words carrying the weight of generations. "By remembering, by protecting, and by ensuring that the land never forgets again." The words hung in the air, and in that moment, Ethan knew that his life had changed forever. This wasn't just a journey of survival. It was a journey of purpose, a purpose that stretched far beyond what he had ever known. As the sun sank lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the grove, Ethan felt a sense of peace settle over him. He wasn't alone anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that was rooted in the earth and the very fabric of life itself. And as they stood together, the weight of the past and the promise of the future intertwined, Ethan knew that they had only just begun to uncover the depths of what lay ahead.